Where are you comfortable? Wherever you want to. I'm fine. Yeah, I can go wherever you please, wherever you'd like to go.
Let's get started. Good afternoon. Thank you and welcome everyone. My name is Mohammed Lashimi. I'm the President and Vice Chancellor at Toronto Metropolitan University. Before we get started, I would like to open today's event with acknowledging the land we are on. Toronto is in the dish with one spoon territory. The dish with one spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. I would like to begin by thanking Minister Ien and Minister Williams for taking the time to be with us here on campus this afternoon. Both ministers and their governments have been true champions of TMU and continue to make us so proud. Minister Ien is an alumna of TMU, former professor, and past member of our Board of Governors. She's also our local member of parliament here in Toronto Centre. During her time as city councillor for Brampton, Minister Williams was a strong supporter for our vision for a new kind of medical school in the city of Brampton and continues to champion this work at the provincial level. 2 weeks ago, we announced the location of our new medical school in Brampton. Both Premier Ford and the Mayor of Brampton were there for this big celebration. And I want to take the opportunity to thank Minister Williams for she was the first one who identified that location for us when she was at Brampton City Hall. Minister Ien and Minister Williams, thank you once again for joining us and for your continued leadership in equity, diversity, inclusion, and women's rights, values that are central to our identity at TMU. And I'm looking forward to listening in today's discussions. Our moderator today is Marci Ien, who founded the Democracy Forum at TMU 5 years ago. Time flies. This is our 26th forum. Over the years, we have hosted Prime Minister, premiers, and cabinet ministers from across Canada and the world. We have also welcomed Ontario's Black Caucus, Indigenous activists, and other champions of democracy. Martin is a visiting practitioner in the Faculty of Arts and a political columnist at the Toronto Star, where he was a foreign correspondent for 11 years, reporting from more than 40 countries across the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. He has been a strong link to key community leaders like the ones we have with us today. And I would now hand things off to Marci Cohn, to get the conversation started. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Dr. Lashmi. Bienvenue, bonjour, welcome to our 26th Democracy Forum at TMU, where we try to do democracy differently. A special welcome to our audience watching on CPAC television network and on thestar.com. I always remind people that this is not a news conference or a confrontation. It's a democracy forum where we try to dig in a little deeper and push for more in-depth answers, so no pressure. We have had, as Mohammed said, some of the most powerful women politicians in Canada. We've had the defense minister, the foreign minister, we've had some pioneering women premiers and party leaders, but we've never had the ministers responsible for the status of women and accountable for it. These two politicians are mandated and empowered to push for gender equality, the rights of young people, and the rights of disabled people. So we've brought them together on stage today, and the timing is no accident during Black History Month. Both of these ministers wanted to be here at this time to talk about what's important to everyone in the room. So let me tell you a little bit more about our two guests. Marci Ien has been Canada's Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth since 2021. She's the Member of Parliament for Toronto Centre, which, as Mohammed implied, means she's responsible for TMU as well. In fact, she has a connection that goes way back. She graduated from the Radio and Television Arts program, and which is where she launched her career in journalism as a television reporter and host. You've heard that she returned as a visiting professor. She keeps coming back. I first met her at a debate, an election debate a couple of years ago that I moderated for political science students here. And she did survive that debate because she won the election. So welcome back, Minister.
It's nice to be here.
Charmaine Williams is the minister, has been responsible for women's social and economic opportunity. You notice different names, we can talk about that later, since the last election when she became the first Black woman appointed to a progressive conservative cabinet. As the member of provincial parliament, member of provincial parliament for Brampton. She might ask you to applaud for Brampton as well. That's what Bill Davis used to do. She had already broken another barrier as the first Black woman elected to Brampton City Council in 2018. She had a life before politics, just like Marci. She was previously a therapist and behavioral counselor focusing on children's services, where she came face to face with family violence. She studied child and youth services at Centennial College, but Toronto Met is also familiar territory, as you've just heard. I watched her at the dedication ceremony last month for the new medical school at TMU. So welcome back on campus. Okay, a couple of programming notes. I'm going to get off this lectern in a sec. I will kick things off with a few questions just to set the table for broader discussion. Then we'll open it up to the floor in a few minutes. So please start thinking up your own questions. And we've also agreed, or I'm going to tell you now, we'll keep it informal. So no fancy ministerial titles, and you don't have to call me honorable.
Charmaine.
Yeah, you don't have to call me honorable either. So let's get started.
I can sit back then. I know.
Yeah,
I feel like I have to be all proper.
So we'll talk more about politics and policy. We'll drill down in a couple of minutes. But this is Black History Month, so I thought it'd be nice to just start by asking you to talk about your own journeys so that our own audience can hear where you're coming from before we try to tell us where you want to take us. So, Marci, why don't you start? You're the former television host, so you can't take over, but you are. This is your venue. Tell us about your own path to power and why you decided to make the jump to politics.
Martin, thanks a lot for the question. First and foremost, I have to say I'm thinking about Laval, Quebec. And what happened and the families that lost their babies. So I just want to put that out there. That is very much top of mind. But now to my story, it'll be 3 years this coming May that George Floyd was killed. And I say this because it was around that time and during that time that I was doing a talk show and talking about what it felt like to be Black in Canada and how racism wasn't something that our southern neighbors were familiar with, but it It was everything that was happening in Canada too, and telling a lot of my story, but at the same time, thinking about, because it was so unsettling, how I might serve differently. And it's interesting when you put that kind of energy out there, Martin and Charmaine, what might happen, but I was really grappling with that. And it might have been because, it might have been midlife, I was 50 as well, but I was just thinking about, what more can I do? I'm sitting on this, at this table, and I love this show, but what more do I have to give to community? How can I be of use now? That was percolating. And several months later, many months later, because it was the fall of that year, I got a call from the Prime Minister's office asking if I might run. And I have to tell you, it is not anything that I ever considered. There was no path here. If anybody had asked me a couple of years ago what I might be doing now, I very well might have said doing documentaries or, writing something or hosting something or delving into something. But I didn't see this.
And there's always a tension for journalists to not just talk about stuff, but do stuff. I want to turn to you in a second, Charmaine, but let me just quickly ask you to look back for a half a sec about when after you left TMU, you were launched. I think your career started more or less in Nova Scotia.
Started at Channel 11 in Hamilton for 6 years as a writer, a news writer and reporter.
We both know newsrooms are mostly white.
Yeah.
What was it like earlier in your career?
Oh, I remember people not having makeup for me. We don't have your color.
Yeah.
That lighting won't work for you. I remember things like that.
Sure.
Adjustments, little things. We call them microaggressions, but they're all macro. Every last one of them. There are no micro, they're all macro. Yeah. And they're layers that build. So there was that, and also just who was in charge of those newsrooms and the C-suites, and frankly, who still is.
Yep. So Charmaine, I suspect most people here or watching today don't know the details of your own life story and your near-death experience. I'm not exaggerating. So I've heard you open up about this. Can you just share your story for people here, what happened, how it affected you, and how it motivated you?
Yeah, so I will take you back to 2017. It was 6 days after I had my 5th child, Malcolm, and I had a headache and it wouldn't go away. It just got progressively worse. Went to the hospital and they treated me for a migraine because that's what the symptoms look like. I remember telling my husband, okay, go home, because we have 5 kids, so everybody else, go home, take the baby. My mom, send her to the hospital. She'll meet me and take me home once everything goes away. Well, it didn't. I ended up waking up by myself, and know your bodies, ladies. Know your bodies. Get in touch with your bodies. You know when something feels off, and it felt like 2 bricks just banging in my head. Lo and behold, I was having a significant brain hemorrhage. And I was hospitalized and in the ICU. Thankfully, I didn't have to get driven down to Trillium Hospital to have the blood drain. They were able to regulate the blood pressure. And but it was some time where they had to let the blood reabsorb itself, and I've had to kind of relearn how to walk and use my hands, and it was pretty devastating. But you have a lot of nights alone to think when you're in a hospital, and it was those moments where I started to really question this next step, because I felt God has given me another chance. I'm like, well, what am I going to do with it? And the seed for politics was planted in 2014 when my friend won regional councillor. And for the whole term, she was like, you need to be here. You need to be at this table. And I'm like, it's politics. I don't have time for this. But I was working in a system, right, where I was seeing women who look like me, women who look like they have it all, having to face some major systemic challenges and going up against a brick wall every time. And I would always ask, who's responsible for this? And why can't we get more funding for this? Who's making the decision to put the funding here instead of there? Well, everybody would say you have to get involved in politics. Those are the tables where those decisions were made. So when she won, it took 4 years and a brain hemorrhage for me to realize that maybe I should throw my name in the hat. And I did that after getting full clearance from the neurologist in May 2018. I'll never forget that. And yeah, and you know, here comes June, July, and I was asked again, are you gonna run? I'm like, why not? So I ran and didn't know what I was doing, but I had no idea, but I ran and I actually won. I spoke to what the community's issues were, and that was really important for me. I've been in Brampton since 1980, and so that's why I knew the location would be perfect. And yeah, and now, you know, here I am, and that's the wonderful thing about Ontario. It is a place where regular old me can take a chance and do something pretty spectacular.
Okay, I have a follow-up question that it might be on the minds of a few of the students and faculty here. It's not a trick question, but we had Annamie Paul here a couple of years ago as the Green Party leader, first Black woman party leader in Canada, and she described how she kicked the tires of the various parties. Liberals, New Democrats, Greens. She actually said, did not try the Tories. Tell us why you chose the Progressive Conservatives.
You know, that's a good question. I come from a family of immigrants. My parents are Jamaican. My grandparents are from the Windrush generation, who were on the Windrush ships from Jamaica to England. And my dad is the only one out of 5 kids who said, I'm going to try start a life in Canada, and came to Canada. And so I've always grown up with the mindset that you have to do everything you can to be successful. You've been given this, you know, game to play in. You find the rules, you figure out how to do it, and you just go for it. And that's always just been my mindset, and it fit so well over the years with how I see Doug Ford government operating and getting some of the things. We just need to get some things done here.
I know that slogan.
Yes, get it done. And
Okay.
I'm like, this is perfect. Let's get it done.
We'll circle back to the Doug Ford and Justin Trudeau governments in a minute when we dive in and when we get questions from the audience. Quick question for both of you. We had the NDP Black Caucus here a couple of years ago at the Democracy Forum. 5 members in that Black Caucus, now reduced to 1. And there are 3 Black members of provincial parliament in the Progressive Conservative Party, 1 Liberal, 1 New Democrat right now. Should we move? I think federally is there a Black Caucus still?
Yes.
And it crosses party lines.
Yes, it does.
The NDP decided to have its own party caucus. Should we have a Black Caucus in Ontario that crosses party lines?
I think so, and I think with the anti-racism and directorate, I can't say that word, that was the purpose of it, and it's to really, when you're a Black person, you identify as a Black person first, especially, that's how I see it. And all of us who are Black provincially, we have great conversations across the floor about what it means to be a Black person in Ontario. So I have to say, even if we haven't given an official name, we are doing that.
There's an unofficial Black Caucus.
Yeah, we are doing that because, you know, we all have experienced the same micro and macro aggressions. And we have some things to work on.
Does it work federally, Marci?
It does. It works so well federally. We come together, we talk about ideas. This is not about partisanship. This is about being Black in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, what that means, sharing experiences. There are many, of course, who've been there a lot longer than I have, that can share their experiences and give good advice. And it's just people working together.
Yeah. Okay. So we will dig into the differences in a second, but you're on stage together now. You're both from different levels of government, sometimes rival governments, not always. You are from different political parties. Marci, you're a federal Liberal. You are an Ontario Progressive Conservative. I've seen you in a partisan setting in that debate that I moderated, where all the various party members were going after each other. How do you get along together as politicians? You knew each other a bit before politics, I think.
I need to tell this story and then jump in.
Yeah.
Okay, because I'm so proud of you. So it was mentioned that Charmaine made history on Brampton City Council, and several years ago, and I think it was right around this time, because it was Black History Month.
I do remember.
I got an invitation to go to Brampton and see Charmaine and others for Black History Month. And I was still working as a journalist at that time. And I remember that day saying, gotta make time for this. I think we switched some things around so that we drive to Brampton and be there. And so we celebrated Black History Month together, and it was beautiful. And I still remember, I thought, who is this powerful woman? Who is this? And so it has been such an honor just to follow you and your progression, because I remember we didn't have a long time that day. It was a short time, but a good time.
And you were in a fabulous yellow shirt. And
Oh
you were
my
getting
gosh.
I do. And you were getting on a plane.
I was.
You were going to go up north.
Shoot, I was going to Iqaluit.
Yes.
Oh gosh.
Yeah.
Fancy.
And I was
Yeah,
fangirling.
I was. No.
Okay, but it can't always be peace and love. So what are the differences that you cannot overcome?
We haven't faced any of that yet.
Yeah.
We worked through,
Yeah.
the action plan in Pictou, Nova Scotia. I mean,
we did.
Here's the thing, Martin, when it comes to the portfolios that we have, and I don't want to speak out of turn here, Charmaine, so
Go right
please delve it. I don't want to speak out of turn. But, these are not partisan issues.
Yeah.
Right.
And I find that when I'm in committee, I find that in cabinet, I find that cross-party, when it comes to women and it comes to gender, and that's all genders, when it comes to economic empowerment, when it comes to young people, we find ways to work together.
Yeah.
And it may be an anomaly in government, but we find ways to work together.
And to add to that, I agree 100%. And when you're fighting to become the leading party, that's where you become very political.
Yep.
But when it comes down to after you've won, you have to govern, and you have to work together and do what is best for the people, right? I know over the years that hasn't seemed like it, but there were times, especially in Ontario, where parties would communicate across the floor to come up with strategies to best serve the residents. And I choose to go back to that every time.
Let's talk about some of the substance now, because democracy is about accountability. So let's talk about some of the core issues: gender-based violence, intimate partner violence. 1/3 of women report sexual assaults over age 15. About 44% of women report intimate partner violence in their lifetime. The statistics from the report from the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls were pretty bracing numbers. So the abuse has been around forever, and it never seems to stop. And ministers responsible for women's affairs have been around almost forever, for half a century at least. Your predecessors first met, not you, in 1972, 50 years ago. So, question for both of you: what are you doing about the abuse, and why is it taking so long? You met in Nova Scotia a few months ago. Marci, why don't you start?
Yeah. Words matter. And that's why it's called the action plan to end gender-based violence, because you have to name it. And I don't know if that happened with our predecessors all those years ago, but when you put a name on something and you bring provinces, territories, the federal government together and say, we're going to tackle this, that means something. The other part of this, and I so appreciated Charmaine, because I think of our time in Pictou, is that each province is unique in what it needs. Ontario is not the same as, and territory, none of it. Quebec is not the same as Manitoba. And so what was important about the plan was that it was grassroots and provincially based with our support. And it took a couple years to figure that out, Martin, it did. That we had to listen to those on the ground that were doing the work, and that provinces knew best what was right for them. that territories knew best what was right for them.
Okay, so, but,
yes.
and it's, but Charmaine, it's a 10-year
Yes.
timeline. That's a long way off. What's on, and so you are now, I guess this meeting set the stage for an action plan, and now you have to negotiate it.
The negotiations.
How do you make it happen?
Well, you know, with Marci said it right, like when, as a province, we do know what is best and what is going to work. We also know what we have in our coffers, what we're spending our money on. And right now it's about where you talk about the missing and murdered Indigenous women. Last term, the first time in a long time, we created IWAC, which is an Indigenous Women's Advisory Council, and that has women from Indigenous communities across Ontario, and we meet once a month. I have a seat at that table. I don't lead it because that's not what I believe we should be doing. We should be there to listen and get the advice from them on how we should be addressing the issue. And the same applies for violence against women in every community that we have. There are organizations that are doing really hard work and have been asking, this is how government can support us. And so much of our programs are being developed around what is already being done, but just putting into legislation and plan those things that we're hearing on the ground. And it does come with significant investment. The beautiful thing about the action plan and being in PIC2 is that idea sharing.
Oh, huge.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Idea sharing. And also realizing that, you know, maybe there are some things that we can put a different attention to. For example, while we were there, we brought up, I think I brought up the importance of accountability and justice when we're addressing violence against women. Because I don't think, and many of my colleagues don't think you can address violence against women without talking about the person inflicting the violence and how we are going to address it. So it was a great conversation, and you know, Marci and her team was really supportive in the plan for us to have the GBV NAP, Gender-Based Violent National Action Plan, I'm sorry.
Everyone falls prey to acronyms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Have it brought to the FPT on justice, and that was
Federal
important,
provincial
the federal
territories.
provincial territories, their meeting, and have the National Action Plan reviewed at their table, so that they can look at how we can implement accountability and measures into their work. So I just think it was a great chance for us to talk, and
We shared a lot, and we also, because you were talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, when we have those meetings, Indigenous leaders are centered. And so day one is about centering Indigenous leaders, and what we did, which I thought was so powerful, was we had a circle. So everybody was in a circle, and we could listen, the sharing that went on, and I can't even repeat half of it, because the stories that were shared in that circle, that first day, and why this plan was important, and what it meant to Indigenous communities across this country, and the women in particular at in that circle that had worked so hard for so many years of their life to get work done and shared. It was amazing, and we learned so much, and that goes into the plan, all of those learnings.
And these are stories you would have heard in your work before politics, and your work and my work in journalism too. So you've had a lifetime to prepare for it. Okay, just a heads up, we're going to open it up to the microphones in a minute. Thanks to the rain delay, you won't face a long lineup, but start thinking up your questions. While we're waiting, I have a different question for both of you. Marci, I've seen you on TV sometimes doing World Vision stuff overseas. You've talked about your faith, Charmaine. You mentioned it briefly a moment ago, and in the legislature you talked about it. And in Canada, American politicians talk about it all the time. I don't mean to present an unflattering juxtaposition there, but I mean, in America, people talk about faith. And when, as a journalist overseas, I covered faith in Asia and the Middle East. But Canadian politicians don't. Why don't you go first? Talk about faith and how that informs your action in politics.
It's so funny, Martin, because after consulting with family and friends as to whether or not I should run, the overwhelming consensus from many of my friends was, "But you're so nice. what might happen, and what might they do to you?" It's faith is empathy, first and foremost, and that will never change. It is about kindness, which I always say I wish I could legislate and can't. But with the portfolios that I am so honored to have, when I look at the pandemic as an example and who is disproportionately impacted, it's all of the people under our umbrellas. It is women, it is gender diverse people, it is, and then you put a Black or intersectional lens on that, it is young people. And so it is leading with empathy. It is leading that way, it is understanding, it is listening. I always say it's the House of Commons, heavy on the Commons. Because like Charmaine, you know, I'm a daughter of immigrants who was born in St. Jamestown. And here I sit, right? Born in St. Jamestown, raised in Scarborough, and here we sit.
But the House of God, how does that motivate your thinking?
It is primarily the kindness aspect. I'm the daughter of an educator, and
that explains everything.
I am,
Save the
and
world.
it would have been, no, really, and it was a number 2. Journalism and teaching were like this. But I say that because I still, you know, when I'm out and about in Toronto, get people coming up to me and saying things like, "So your dad helped me when I was in grade 10." And my mom was the kind of mom where if someone didn't have a place to stay, our house was the place. And it was those principles that guided them. And so, Martin, that's what it was about. It's what I grew up with. It's the principles that have always guided me and guide my life.
Okay.
But they're based in kindness.
Charmaine, how does faith inform your own political action?
Well, I grew up in the church. My family were Anglicans. And I guess you could say medium to high Anglican, and if you're Anglican, you know what that means.
I went to an Anglican university, the only Jewish guy in an Anglican university, so I saw it up close. Yeah.
Right.
You've
Over
lived
the
an
years,
interesting life, Martin.
right? Yeah.
Very high Anglican.
Very high Anglican.
Incense.
Incense and everything, yeah. So over the years, we kind of got rid of the incense and stuff, only on special occasions like Epiphany and everything. But so I grew up with the teachings, and you know, the commandment, love thy neighbor as I have loved you. And I know that God's love is unconditional. You have the scripture for Corinthians, love is patient, love is kind. And I'm not one of those.
I love that verse.
Okay, exactly. I couldn't repeat it to you because I don't memorize scripture. I'm not that kind of, I'm not that.
That's very high.
That's very high. But, you know, I think I find my faith it grounds me. And when I'm having those very difficult times, like I cut my teeth in municipal politics, and remember, I worked in a very therapeutic environment, right? Where everybody is our counselors, and we want to do the best for families and work through challenges, a very nurturing and loving and kind environment. And then I went to politics. So I needed, my faith grounded me in why I'm doing this work, and why it is important to be kind, why it is important to take yourself and your ego out of everything you're doing.
That's the best point ever.
Yeah.
The ego
It's
part.
the ego. I'm not here, this isn't about me. I'm here because I know God has put me here to do work out there. So my faith just grounds me. And it's not something that I talk about openly because I'm an Anglican. We just get out and do God's work.
That's why I asked the tough questions.
Right?
Okay, who has some tougher questions? Anybody want to take the microphone and go ahead? Oh, Lauren.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story, both professional and personal. They matter. And of course, we are well aware that representation also matters. And especially from those of us from marginalized communities. I live with a disability. And so, but politics at all levels does not always make it easy for marginalized communities, women particularly, to become involved. I remembered when the first Indigenous Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada was appointed, and she was questioned about, well, how is you being Indigenous going to, in fact, why is that even a question? Of course, we bring our authentic self to politics and the law. So what do you see, both of you, are the challenges in broadening the field to encourage women, intersectional women, to aspire to a career in politics? Because it's disheartening when we see what happens. It requires a lot of energy. Thank you.
Well, I'll start by saying there's two things. One, women have to see themselves as leaders and really see ourselves as leaders. We have been taught that we should be quiet and that we should always be in the corner, and nobody puts baby in the corner. We're leaders. We are leaders. We deserve to be at the table. And when you see yourself as a leader and worthy of being in the front, then you will go out and find the tools and the people who are going to help you get there. And so that's one thing. The other thing is, everywhere you go, there are people who are biased, that have racist beliefs, that are sexist. Everywhere you go, you're going to encounter those people. And it is our experiences that give us the ability to pick up on what that feels like. We have a feeling. I always say, we know when someone's being a certain way towards us. And because of that, we have to use that and talk about and identify it, and that's why we need to be there and find those people who are going to help us get to the table, so that we can do, like, if we just kind of succumb to all those negative beliefs about what a Black woman is and who a Black woman is, we wouldn't be here, right? So I just think, one, there are people like this everywhere. Two, you've got to see yourself as a leader and go for it. And there are people who will help you get there.
Those are such good points. I have so many thoughts on this. Is it Lauren?
Yeah.
Lauren, yeah.
And
So
speak carefully, because Lauren's a human rights lawyer, so she will parse your words.
I think about the cabinet table that I sit at, okay? So I want to draw a picture for you here, because we all walk into a room, and there's a big table, and there are about 40 people sitting around that table, right? So I look next to me, and there is Kamal Kara, Brampton.
Yep.
Kamal Kara, who is the youngest in our cabinet, but is the Minister of Seniors, because she's an emergency room nurse, okay? I look across and I see Marci Ien, who made history herself as an Asian cabinet minister. I look to my right, and there's Minister Carla Qualtrough. I look, down the way a little bit, and I see there's a couple of people I see, but what I'm trying to say is that I look at this rainbow and this diversity. I can hear even Goody Hutchings in my ear right now talking about rural and people living in different parts of the country and how they're left out. What I'm saying is that we have a gender diverse cabinet, but it is a cabinet that is so diverse when it comes to lived experience, when it comes to race, there are a lot of firsts around that cabinet table. So there's that, and that only builds the learning. It builds the policy making, because everybody's got different experiences. So there's that. The other part of it is Charmaine's a first doing what she's doing. I was a first in my previous career. I'm a second in this one, and it took 20 years to get there. The Honorable Jean Augustine, the legend, was the first. That says a lot. But a thing or two about being first. You're bringing a community with you, right? Like when Charmaine's walking through doors, it isn't just about Charmaine. And when I'm walking through things, it is never just about me. It is the community that you're bringing with you. Carla, same thing. Mary, same thing. Harge, Same thing. You know, like you're bringing communities with you as you go. And there is a certain pressure that comes along with that. It's an honor to have that pressure, but I sometimes think, and then here's where I lose sleep at night, I need to do it all. Like, what's good? If I don't do this, who will? And if I don't do it well, what does this mean for who comes next? So there's all of that. And lastly, a word or two about hybrid provisions. So during the pandemic, we had hybrid provisions that allowed us to meet cabinet, do committees, vote electronically.
Yeah.
And those are still in place. I have an 11-year-old and an 18-year-old, and I don't have a partner. And so what that means, if I'm going to do this job, and if I recognize the fact I still want to see my kids and be in their life, and if it means I want to serve my constituents well, it means I go between Toronto Centre and Ottawa. And I continue to use those hybrid provisions at times. And I do that because I'm showing and want to show women who will say, how do you balance? How do you do all this? That this is possible. So Charmaine says you have to see yourself, you absolutely do, but you also have to know that it's possible. And I will push and continue to push to keep those hybrid provisions because I know it helps me. Because I can leave here today and I can pick up my son after his basketball practice and I can take a committee meeting after I put him to bed. Because I can do all of that. And it's important to show that too.
That's great.
Couple of interesting things there, because you may know that Laura May Lindo, who used to be chair of the Ontario NDP Caucus, has just resigned because she had such a hard time with childcare services coming from Kitchener-Waterloo. So it's a really interesting challenge. One other editorial comment is cabinets have always been, by definition, as a political journalist, I see this, diverse, just geographically. They forgot about the women and people of color. So it's funny that
and to us LGBTQ.
Yeah, in every way diverse. And so not funny that they've only come around to broader diversity, more broadly defined. You've mentioned a couple of times, Charmaine, racism, systemic racism, and I just want to read a quote for folks about something you said in the legislature in your first speech, where you said, people are watching what we say, what we do, and watching how we react, how we react to triggers, failures, and perceived slights, unquote. So I can guess what you meant, but tell us what you meant, and tell us if you've had about any triggers since you gave that speech and how you push back.
Oh yeah, I've had triggers. You know, and I say people are watching, and I think it's an important reminder, and that's why when I made that comment earlier about my ego, I know my reaction is going to be judged, whether it's a good one or a bad one, but my reaction is also going to teach other people on how we are to react to these slights and triggers. And what works for me is a calculated reaction, because I know that I'm here to further the conversation. And it's important for me to be mindful, and not everybody is going to agree with the same strategy, but it's important for me to be mindful that I am around people that are not used to having people that look like me at the table. I'm around people that don't think I should be at the table. But if I can break down the stereotypes that people have about me, I know I'm doing a good thing, and I'm there to help expand their mind. But one thing I don't do is I don't let it slide.
You don't let it slide.
No, I will come back around, be like, so by the way, you know, I felt that comment was uncalled for, or just say, you know, I think I perceived you speaking from a position of privilege, and help start that dialogue. I have to do that in my group and around the people that I'm working with, because we all have a duty to the people we're serving.
How's the progress since you gave that speech?
How's the progress?
Since you gave that speech?
It's been good. I think there's a lot of bridges that are being built. And I think we are, you know, but I know it's gonna take time, right? And we're passionate
These are
people.
systems.
Yeah, these
are systems.
systems.
You don't change systems overnight.
You don't.
No, it's day by day.
Day by
The
day.
mic is open if anyone has a question. Otherwise, oh, okay, go ahead. I was about to jump into the breach. Hi.
Hello. My name is Isha, and I'm actually a fourth-year biomedical engineering student, graduating soon.
Okay, I'm doing this.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can hear me okay?
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Sounds really weird, like the echo.
Yeah.
One, thank you for being here. I did not realize I would be spending my lunch with some incredible people making real difference and change. I'm so nervous.
Oh, take your time.
Take a
hon.
deep breath.
You're doing great.
I've actually been to the social, and you were there. So it's incredible to see, I guess, your progress on where you are now. Thank you for coming back to TMU. Also, I'm sorry, but this is the first time I've heard of you, but the two of you are so incredible.
Thank you.
I was born in Nepal, but I lived in St. Jamestown for 10 years. So when you said that, I was like, no.
Ontario Street, Ontario, 700.
Wellesley,
Yeah.
we got the
Yeah.
30,
Yeah.
and now I live in Scarborough, so.
Okay. All right. Did you go to high school in Scarborough?
I went to Jarvis, like right across.
You went to Jarvis. You went to my only high school. My only high school in Toronto Centre, but I went to high school in Scarborough.
Where'd you go in Scarborough?
Agincourt and Leacock. Look at us having a
That's
conversation.
amazing. Yeah, I'm loving
Look at us
this.
having a conversation. I went to
Tell me more.
I know.
Keep
I went to
going.
Agincourt and Leacock. Anyway, yeah.
So I have not had like a near-death experience, but I think I have faced a lot of pain and struggle. So I kind of understand what you're talking about, where one day you wake up and you're like, oh, I am alive. We are alive. So I'm kind of in that phase right now where I'm going to graduate. I'm trying to figure out, well, what's next? So I have two questions. First, from what you've done in your career so far, can you give us a few examples of real change? And what does that look like? And when you said you lead with empathy and kindness, that's what I've been doing for like 3 years. And I did not know that that was possible in politics.
Neither did I. Neither did I. What's your name?
Isha,
Isha.
yes.
Okay.
So that's my first question. Should I mention the second, or would you
ahead.
like?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just some like concrete.
I'm just going to warn you, if you give them two questions, they'll answer the easier one first. Question period trick.
We are strong women and we can do hard things. So
Yes.
they'll get
Yes.
to it.
Yes, we can.
All right. So yeah, first question, concrete examples. Second question, I'm graduating in 3 months. I'm looking for something to do over the summer. I'm trying to find my place in all this. Can you give me some tangible steps on how do I figure that out?
Okay.
And again, just incredible. Just thank you.
So interestingly, they both have, our two guests have different titles, and I'm trying to find, you know your titles, but I have to refresh my memory. Tell me your titles again. You are Minister of,
Women and Gender Equality and Youth.
and your title is?
Women's social and economic opportunities.
Right, so you're on the spot. Women's social and economic opportunity. You go first.
Well, first I have to say the ministry used to be called Women's Issues.
Name change.
You didn't have a problem with that.
I know, right? Well, my issues are my husband's issues. So. Those are good questions. I think being able to be at the table where we're deciding where funding is going has been really important, an important conversation, I have to say. But also knowing that this next step within my ministry, we're really coming up with a plan, right? We are coming up with how can we make sure that women are at the forefront of every conversation. I've had the privilege of meeting with chambers across Ontario and put into action one of the recommendations that came out of the Special Task Force on Women and the Economy for Ontario. And that is, and it seems so simple, but one of the main recommendations was mentorship. Women are asking for mentors. Women need mentors, right? Exactly what you're asking us is, what am I going to do for that next step? Is you saying, I need somebody who's going to help me, because we can't answer that question in 30 seconds.
Yeah, that's not a 40-second,
right?
Yeah.
But you're speaking to those fundamental foundational pieces that women need to be successful. So mentorship is one of them, and working with the chambers to say, okay, you have some of the brightest minds that are in business, in entrepreneurship, you name it. What are you going to do to help women who come to you to be successful? So we're looking at a bigger strategy. Also, putting into action some of the other asks which are like grants and funding for women in business. Another key thing we're looking at is how to dismantle the barriers that are preventing women from entering into the trades. I know this is not the area you're in, but it does enter into that whole STEM field. Women are significantly underrepresented. And the STEM is a foundation for many of the trades as well. We've found that that 5% of women in the trades, that number hasn't increased in the 90s. Well, we've also found that 50% of women who enter the trades leave after 4 years. And when we've discovered that in our research, and my team is looking at all of the data and asking many of the unions and so on and so forth, we're like, we do quite well at encouraging women to get into these areas, but we struggle with retention. And why are women leaving? And one thing I've been doing right now is naming it. Sexual harassment on the workforce. We have to call it out. We have to talk about it. We have to start putting in motion steps to hold offenders accountable and making their job sites, making these environments safer for women. And so those are some of the things that we're doing. And I could get into how much money we're investing here and there and that, but that's boring.
She does it all. She does it all the time.
But when I say, we're here, I know I'm here to try and make systemic change. These are the things that we're working on in my ministry, and it feels so good to have these serious conversations with the people who I know have the ability to make that change, and to see more women like you enter into biotechnology, agrotech, you name it, all of these places where we are only getting those low-paying jobs. So I'm going to stop there and kick it over to the Honorable.
Oh gosh. Aisha, you're awesome, number one. I'm going to start with the kindness and empathy piece. Have you ever watched Question Period? Do you know anything about Question Period? I know, everybody's like, oh my gosh. Okay, so I have the honor of serving young people across this country as the Minister of Youth. And the theater of Question Period, and I will call it theater, doesn't impress them much.
Yeah.
They watch, and this is what I hear all the time. It's like, you guys are always fighting. What are you really doing for us? You're screaming, you're doing that. The Prime Minister said something that the other day that really kind of stopped me, and I had to think about it. And he said that Canada really is built on compromise. We get things done because we compromise, we come together. And it's easy to stand in one corner and scream and yell, and it's easy to stand over here and scream and yell, but until you do this and come together for the people in this country, you're not really getting a lot done. So what that is empathy, okay? So I wanna show you how empathy works in politics, and it's how it's palpable to me. And it has to work that way because, as I said before, I never saw myself here, and for that reason. I used to interview politicians. I never wanted to be one.
Were you kind?
Always.
Okay.
I pressed. I was respectful. I might have had to ask the same question 7 times.
Yes. There you are.
But I was. Okay, so there's that. Change. So I'll tell you a quick story. I went to Winnipeg several months ago. And the member for Winnipeg Centre is an NDP member. Her name's Leah Gazan. And I visited a place called Velma's house. She wanted me to see it. And I walked in. It's a place where Indigenous women go and seek shelter, those who are fleeing domestic violence, and it's low barrier, which means anybody can come. Anybody's welcome. Leah's my critic. I have 4 of them because of my ministry. She's one of my critics. And I learned so much from her. And I believe in that. I believe in reaching out and having with everybody that would be my critic, and frankly, across the aisle, doing whatever I have to do to get the work done. Anyway, go to Velma's house, and when I arrive, there is a woman under the porch because she has slept there. It's ramshackle. I go inside, and these amazing women that work there are somehow putting meals together with this rickety stove, and they're churning out 50 meals a day. There are women, you know, at different levels of the house who sought shelter there. I'm talking to one woman, her name's Swan, and she said, this place has to stay. This place has to, and she was telling me her story and being on the streets and all of these things. And the problem is that they couldn't stay there. It just wasn't safe to stay there, and they needed a new place. And Leah wanted me to see it, like take a look at it. And I couldn't stop thinking about it after seeing it. And so long story, very, very short, I have a ministry that builds capacity, meaning we give monies to organizations on the ground to help them build their capacity. I don't have core funding, I build capacity. And that means that I work with my cabinet colleagues to get things done. I call our ministry kind of the glue that holds things together because it's, hey, Minister Anand, or hey, Minister Mendocino, or hey, Minister Haidu. That's kind of what we do. Anyway, after leaving there, there were conversations that happened, and a lot of conversations trying to figure out what we could do. And our ministry put forward some monies to kind of hold the place together for a bit. But then Minister Haidu came forward with core funding. And what ended up happening is we went back to Winnipeg. Velma's has now taken over what was an old Ronald McDonald house. And Patty's ministry has provided the core funding for that to sustain them for the next, I believe, 4 years. I saw Swan again, that lady, and it was big hugs all around. And several of the women that I'd seen initially that day, that's change. Like if I don't do another thing in my time, that showed me that this was worth it, right? Because those women are safe and they're off the street, and they've got a commercial kitchen now, forget the rickety stove. Nice. And they've got people that care and therapists and all the things in a beautiful, beautiful facility. Those are the good stories that you don't always hear about, but that's an NDP critic, that's another minister, that's me, that's all coming together, and that's how it can work. That's change, right? That's real change. With regards to you, I mean, Charmaine is right. This is a longer conversation, but I remember meetings with Mentorship Canada, and mentorship is so necessary. Yeah. It is something that I push at every level of my ministry, but in talking to them, the interesting thing about mentorship is that young people don't want it to stop. So they don't want mentors that drop in for a career day, or, right? They want it all the way through. Yeah. And that's something that we're working on. They don't want it to drop off, so that you would still have a mentor right now, right? Somebody that you'd be asking these questions to. I will also tell you that it's important to know what you don't want. It's really important to know what you don't want. Sometimes, the question is, what do you want? What do you want in life? What do you want to do in life? And all of these decisions that you have to make as a young person, it's figure out what you don't want to do, for sure. I would say start there. And also volunteerism.
Yeah.
I have got a lot of things within my ministry. I'm sure Charmaine does too. Go on our websites, volunteer. I can give you about 15 things in St. Jamestown right now. A couple more in Regent Park.
And
Moss Park too.
I think the mentoring piece is a
Right.
big piece.
Yes.
I want to just, we're almost out of time. I want to just end
geez.
with one quick question for both of you. We've talked about gender violence. You've also talked about kindness. But let's talk about personal security, your personal security as politicians, your own safety. Marci, your cabinet colleague, Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister, was accosted a few months ago by a very big guy in Alberta. We had the Defense Minister on stage here who had to, was face to face with a protester who was kind of really invading her personal space. So the question is I think you've talked publicly about your concerns that threats were I think your words were the number one fear for your family when you entered public life. So how do you stay safe in a hostile environment, whether online or in person, both of you?
First and foremost, a big thank you to the people that are protecting us today.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. For keeping us safe, always, thank you. Online. So that was the part. When I was doing the social, I talked quite freely. As a journalist, you can't do that. You're neutral. When I was on that show, I was anything but. And that's when it was, you've all heard the shut up and dribble, right, with LeBron James. I got the shut up and just read a teleprompter kind of thing. And people didn't often like they didn't say often, but sometimes didn't like what I was saying and how I was saying it. And that led to threats. And it led to death threats, and not just against me, but my family, my kids as well. And that's why the conversation about running was really important. And that's what they were concerned about. I will say this, because that was a very hard video to watch with Chrystia, who I love dearly. Black women, racialized women, nobody gets it like us, right? And we all do, but nobody does. It's a different, this is why there's misogynoir and all these things. Nobody does, and it's not always talked about. And I realized that when, I call them my sisters, the sisters on the social, my best friends, where we would all be saying the same thing, but nobody got the threats that I did. And it's hard to take, but as Charmaine said, you have to name these things. You got to name them. And so, police were involved. They kept us safe. They continue to keep us safe.
Charmaine?
Yeah, like I said earlier, I come from therapeutic world. And so I never experienced threats before, except for my kids saying I hate you and stuff like that.
My daughter's here today, so I'm gonna have to, no comment.
Yeah, I was the only one on council last term that had the police come to my office twice to take down statements and record voicemail. And having to do check-ins and have somebody walk me to my car. It hasn't been like that since becoming a minister, because I'm a minister of women's social and economic opportunities. It's a feel-good ministry. So I haven't done anything out there yet that is controversial per se, but yeah, Marci's right. Like the only one in council that got the attacks. And I grew up in a family, it was just like, Charmaine, them things are gonna happen. Just keep going, Keep it moving. And we just keep, and that's how I am.
There's a tension between suck it up and face the threat.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But like I said, one thing I wasn't gonna do is tell people don't worry about it. I'm like, call the police, people need to know about it. Everybody in the city hall needs to know this is happening to one of their counselors. And, but you also know who reacts to it and who doesn't really react to it. And when they see one of their colleagues being treated that way, you know who's got your back and who doesn't.
You sure do.
And you're like, I see you.
And neither one of you let it stop you.
No,
No.
no, of course
How
not.
quickly we said that.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing we said earlier. If we believed the bias and the racism and all the crap that comes our way, we wouldn't be here.
The only thing that's going to stop you is the clock. We're out of time.
Yeah.
So we're
went-
actually into overtime. So
did.
my apologies to your staff who are going to kill me. I shouldn't joke about that. But you are prisoners. We dropped your ministerial titles, but you're still prisoners of your ministerial schedules. So you're busy, and I want to thank you for making the time. And it took us a long time to organize this, but you were both on side from the beginning. So thank you.
Thank
for your
you so
contribution.
much. Thank you.
So I just want to thank the ministers for defending democracy and defending themselves so ably today. Thanks to the audience for coming out in a really tough weather day for Toronto. I mean, I'm from Montreal, so this is not really intimidating, but we really appreciate it. A very quick programming note, our next Democracy Forum is next month with your colleague, the Minister of Immigration and Refugees and Citizenship, Sean Fraser, which is a nice fit for TMU, Toronto Met, given its immigration and refugees and resettlement program. You can get the details online. A special thanks to the Faculty of Arts for sponsoring today's event and for so much work getting it done. Thank you. Merci. Megwich.